The knife was already at her throat when Alira Voss stopped screaming. She had learned, in 19 years of living under her father's roof, that screaming only made things worse. It made her sisters laugh harder. It made her father turn his face away faster. So she stood very still in the cold hallway outside the council chamber, the blade of her sister Cassia's words cutting deeper than any real weapon ever could, and she said nothing at all. "You will go," Cassia said again, straightening the sleeve of her expensive green dress. "The council has already decided. Father has already signed the papers. There is nothing left for you to cry about, Alira, unless you plan to cry about everything, as usual." Beside her, Marisol examined her own nails, bored, as though they were discussing the weather, and not her younger sister's entire future. "You should be thanking us," Marisol said. "Nobody else wanted you. At least this way you're useful for something." Alira's hands trembled at her sides. Outside, the wind of the Thornwood territory howled against the old stone walls, the kind of wind that meant winter was coming fast and hard. She had grown up in this pack house, had scrubbed its floors and mended its curtains and cooked meals she was rarely allowed to sit and eat. And in all those years she had never once heard a kind word from either of the women standing in front of her now. "What do you mean, go?" Alira finally managed to ask. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "The Blackthorn pack," her father said, stepping out from the council chamber behind them, his face unreadable, the way it always was when he had already made a decision he knew was wrong. Edric Voss was the beta of Thornwood, a tired man with tired eyes, and he had spent the last decade treating Alira as though her existence had been the price of her mother's death. In his mind, perhaps it had been. "Alpha Draven Ashford has agreed to a truce, but he demands a bride from our pack as a gesture of goodwill, a joining of blood. It will end the fighting before it starts." "Then send Cassia," Alira said. "Or Marisol. They are older." "They are. We are needed here," Cassia interrupted smoothly. "Father cannot run this pack without us managing the households, the trade routes, the diplomacy with the southern packs. You, on the other hand, manage nothing. You are needed nowhere. This is, if anything, the first useful thing you will ever do for this family." The words landed like stones. Alira had heard cruelty from her sisters her whole life, an endless drizzle of it, but this felt different. This felt final. They were not simply insulting her. They were erasing her, folding her up like a piece of old paper and mailing her away to a stranger's kingdom, so that they would never again have to look at the daughter who reminded them of the mother she had killed just by being born. "Father," Alira said, turning to him, searching his face for even a flicker of protest. "You cannot mean this. Blackthorn is our enemy. Their alpha is known to be ruthless. They say he executed his own general for treason with his bare hands. They say many things," her father cut in, though his eyes would not meet hers. "None of it changes our situation. Thornwood is weak, Alira. Our warriors are outnumbered 3-1. If Draven Ashford wanted to burn this territory to the ground, he could do it before winter's end, and there would be nothing any of us could do to stop him. This truce is the only thing standing between our people and a war we cannot win. I am sorry. I truly am. But you leave at dawn." There was no warmth in his apology, only the cold comfort of a man relieved to have found a solution that did not cost him anything he valued. Alira looked from her father to her sisters, searching for even one person in the room who might argue on her behalf, and found no one. The silence told her everything. This decision had been made long before this conversation. She was simply the last person in the house to learn her own fate. That night, Alira did not sleep. She sat by the small window of the room she had been given, at the end of the servants' corridor, watching the moon rise pale and thin over the black trees of Thornwood territory, and she tried to summon the courage to feel afraid. Strangely, what she felt instead was something closer to relief. For the first time in her life, she would be leaving this house. Whatever waited for her at Blackthorn, whatever danger or hardship, it could not possibly be crueler than the home she was leaving behind. She packed the only things that were truly hers: a woolen shawl, worn thin at the edges, a pair of boots she had mended herself more times than she could count, and her mother's necklace, a small pendant of pale blue stone on a silver chain, the only thing of her mother's that Cassia and Marisol had never managed to take from her, mostly because they had never wanted it in the first place. She fastened it around her neck and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror above her wash basin. A thin, plain face looked back at her. Brown hair that never held a curl. Eyes the color of rainwater. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make an Alpha King look at her twice. Perhaps that was for the best, she told herself. Perhaps if she was unremarkable enough, the Alpha of Blackthorn would simply place her somewhere quiet in his court and forget she existed. She could live a small, invisible life among strangers, and at least among strangers there would be no one who blamed her for being born. At dawn, 3 guards from Thornwood arrived to escort her to the border. Her father did not come to see her off. Cassia handed her a small purse of coins, more out of appearance than kindness, and told her to try not to embarrass the family. Marisol did not even bother to leave her bed. Elira climbed into the carriage alone, and as the wheels began to turn, she allowed herself one single look back at the pack house that had never once felt like home. Then she faced forward, toward the mountains that marked the edge of Blackthorn territory, and did not look back again. The journey took 3 days. The guards spoke little to her, their orders clearly limited to delivering her safely and nothing more. She watched the landscape change as they traveled, the gentle hills of Thornwood giving way to darker forests, taller mountains, a wilder and more dangerous kind of beauty. She had heard stories about Blackthorn her entire life, the way children hear ghost stories meant to keep them close to home. They said the Blackthorn pack was the strongest in the region, its warriors trained from childhood to fight without mercy. They said its alpha, Draven Ashford, had taken the throne at a young age after his father's sudden death, and had spent every year since proving that no rival pack would dare test his strength again. They called him the Alpha King, not because any council had crowned him so, but because every pack within 100 miles had learned, through defeat, to fear him enough to use the title. Elira had expected to feel terror as the black stone towers of the Blackthorn stronghold came into view on the 3rd day, rising out of the mountain mist like something carved by the mountain itself rather than built by human hands. Instead, she felt only a strange, hollow calm, the calm of someone who has already lost everything there was to lose and has nothing left to fear losing. The carriage stopped at a massive iron gate. Guards in black uniforms studied her with open curiosity, murmuring to one another in low voices as she stepped down. She smoothed her plain gray traveling dress, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and did her best to stand as though she belonged somewhere, even though she had never once in her life been given the chance to feel that way. "This is the bride from Thornwood?" One of the guards asked, disbelief evident in his voice as he looked her over. She was not dressed like a noblewoman. She carried no elaborate trunks, no jewels, no attendants. She looked, she knew, exactly like what she was, an afterthought, sent because no one wanted to send anyone better. "I am Elira Voss," she said, lifting her chin despite the tightness in her chest. "Daughter of Beta Edric Voss of Thornwood. I was told I am expected." The guards exchanged another look, one that made her stomach twist with unease, and then one of them gestured for her to follow. They led her through a courtyard, busier and grander than anything she had ever seen, past warriors sparring with practiced precision, past servants carrying baskets of fresh bread and firewood, past a garden where black roses grew in perfect rows, despite the coming winter chill. Every person they passed turned to look at her, whispering behind their hands, and Elira understood, with a sinking feeling, that word of her arrival had already spread through the entire stronghold, before she had even reached the front doors. Inside, the great hall of Blackthorn stretched high above her, its ceiling supported by dark wooden beams, carved with the shapes of wolves in mid-run. Torches lined the walls, their flames throwing long shadows across a floor of polished black stone. At the far end of the hall stood a raised platform, and on it, a throne. The throne was empty. "Wait here," the guard instructed, and then he disappeared through a side door, leaving Elira alone in the center of the enormous hall, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her entire life. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breathing, trying to remind herself that whatever happened next could not be worse than what she had already survived. She did not know how long she waited. Long enough for her legs to ache from standing. Long enough for the whispers of servants passing through the hall to become a familiar, unbearable hum in her ears. And then, without warning, the great doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the air in the room seemed to change entirely. She felt him before she saw him. A pressure in the air, a weight that pressed down on every person in the hall, causing servants to bow their heads and guards to straighten their spines. Elira turned toward the doors, and for the first time in her life, she understood what people meant when they spoke of true, undeniable power. He was tall, taller than any man she had ever seen, dressed in black that seemed to drink in the torchlight rather than reflect it. His dark hair was pushed back from a face carved with hard, unforgiving lines, a face that looked as though it had never once needed to smile to command a room. His eyes, when they found hers across the length of the hall, were a deep, storm-colored gray, and the moment they met her own, something inside Alira's chest cracked open, like ice breaking on a spring river. The Alpha King of Blackthorn stopped walking. He stood frozen in the doorway of his own great hall, his entire body suddenly rigid, his gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget, for one long moment, how to breathe. Around them, the whispers in the hall died into complete silence. Even the guards seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening, something none of them had words for. Alira felt it too. A pull, deep and undeniable, something ancient waking up inside her chest, reaching toward him, as though it had been waiting her entire life for exactly this moment. Her mind raced to make sense of the sensation, but her body already understood what her thoughts had not yet caught up to. He took one step toward her, then another, faster now, until he was crossing the hall in long, purposeful strides, guards and servants scrambling out of his path. He stopped only when he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze, close enough that she could see the shock rippling behind those storm-gray eyes. "Say your name," he said, his voice low and rough, as though the words had been dragged out of him against his will. "Alira," she whispered. "Alira Voss." Something shifted in his expression, something between disbelief and hunger, and a kind of desperate relief that she did not yet understand. The entire hall watched in stunned silence, as Draven Ashford, the most feared alpha in the region, reached out and gently took her hand in his, as though she were something precious he was terrified of breaking. "Mate," he said, and the word landed in the silent hall like a thunderclap. Alira's whole world tilted sideways. She had been sent here as a peace offering, a bargaining chip, a burden her family had been eager to unload onto a stranger. She had expected humiliation, perhaps servitude, perhaps a life spent hidden away in some forgotten corner of this cold stone fortress. She had not expected this. She had not expected the most powerful man in the region to look at her as though she were the only person in the entire world worth seeing. And as the weight of his hand closed gently around hers, as the ancient pull between them settled into something that felt frighteningly permanent, Alira understood that her old life, the one where she had been invisible, unwanted, discarded, had just ended in front of hundreds of witnesses. Whatever waited for her now, whatever this bond meant, she was no longer the girl her sisters had traded away without a second thought. She was something else entirely now, and she had no idea yet what that would cost her, or what it would give her in return. The word mate rippled through the great hall like a stone thrown into still water, and Alira felt every eye in the room turn toward her with a new and terrifying intensity. Moments ago she had been an unwanted afterthought delivered from a weaker pack. Now she stood at the center of something the entire court did not know how to react to. Draven did not release her hand. If anything, his grip tightened slightly, as though he feared that letting go would cause her to disappear entirely, some cruel trick conjured by fate, only to be snatched away again. "You felt it," he said quietly, his gray eyes searching her face. "Tell me you felt it too." "I don't understand what I felt," Alira admitted honestly. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I only know that something inside me changed the moment I saw you. I did not expect that. I did not expect any of this." A murmur swept through the gathered court, quickly silenced by a single sharp look from the Alpha King. He turned back to Alira, and for a moment, the hardness in his face softened into something almost gentle. "The mate bond does not lie," he said. "Whatever brought you here, whatever reasons your pack had for sending you, none of that matters now. You are my fated mate, Alira Voss. From this moment, you belong to Blackthorn." Alira's mind reeled. She had traveled 3 days expecting to be handed off like cargo, perhaps assigned to some minor warrior as a political courtesy, perhaps left to fend for herself in a stronghold full of strangers. She had never once imagined this, the idea that the most powerful alpha in the region, a man whose name alone made grown warriors lower their eyes, could look at her, plain and unremarkable Illyra Voss, and call her his mate, felt like a dream she might wake from at any second. "Your Highness," came a voice from the edge of the hall, cool and measured. A tall man stepped forward, dressed in fine dark clothing that marked him as someone of importance, his features sharp and calculating as he studied Illyra with open suspicion. "Forgive my interruption, but should we not first confirm the identity and intentions of this woman before any formal declarations are made? Thornwood is not without its schemes." Draven's jaw tightened, but he did not look away from Illyra. "Kale," he said, "this is not a matter for the council. The bond has already spoken. There is nothing left to confirm." Kale, Illyra would soon learn, was the Alpha's cousin and one of his most trusted advisors, though trust, she would come to understand, was not always the same as agreement. He inclined his head in a show of respect that did not quite reach his eyes. "Of course, my Alpha. I only wish to see Blackthorn protected, as always." The tension in the hall was thick enough to taste, but Draven seemed entirely unbothered by it. He turned his full attention back to Illyra, and for the first time since she had stepped through the gates of this stronghold, she saw something in his expression that was not suspicion or curiosity, but genuine warmth. "You must be exhausted from your journey," he said. "Come, you will rest, and eat, and we will speak properly once you are settled." He led her personally through the halls of the fortress, past chambers grander than anything she had ever imagined living in, past servants who bowed low as they passed, whispering her new title to one another, before she had even fully understood it herself. Luna, mate to the Alpha King, Queen of Blackthorn. The words did not yet feel real. They felt like a costume someone had draped over her shoulders that did not yet fit, that she was terrified to wear too comfortably, in case it was suddenly torn away. The chamber he brought her to was larger than the entire servants' wing of her father's packhouse. A grand bed sat draped in soft furs. A fire already crackled in a wide stone hearth. Windows looked out over the dark mountains, and for a long moment, Illyra simply stood in the doorway, unable to make herself step inside, as though crossing the threshold would make all of this permanent. "This is yours now," Draven said gently, watching her carefully, clearly noting her hesitation. "I know this must feel sudden, overwhelming even. You have every right to feel uncertain. I will not pretend to understand what your life was like before you arrived here, but I intend to make certain that from this day forward, no one in this pack ever treats you as anything less than what you are." Illyra finally looked up at him, searching his hard, handsome face for some sign of deception, some hidden motive behind the kindness in his voice. She had learned, painfully, over 19 years, that kindness often came with conditions, that gentle words were sometimes simply a softer kind of trap. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me at all." Something flickered behind his gray eyes, an old ache she recognized instantly, because she carried the same one herself. "Because I know what it is to be looked at and found lacking by people who were supposed to love you," he said. "I will explain that to you another time. For now, I only want you to understand one thing clearly. Whatever cruelty brought you to my doorstep, it ends here. You will never again be treated as something unwanted." That night, alone in the vast unfamiliar chamber, Illyra sat by the fire long after the servants had brought her a meal finer than any she had eaten in her entire life. She touched the pendant at her throat, her mother's necklace, the only piece of her old life she had carried with her into this strange new one, and she allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to cry. Not from grief, not entirely, but from the disorienting, overwhelming shock of being seen, truly seen, by someone for the very first time. Word of the new Luna spread through Blackthorn territory within a single day. By the second day, it had reached beyond the mountains, carried by traders and messengers to every pack within 100 miles, including Thornwood. In her father's packhouse, Cassia Voss stood frozen in the doorway of the council chamber, staring at the messenger who had just delivered the news, certain she had misheard him. "Say that again," she demanded. "Lady Illyra Voss," the messenger repeated, looking faintly nervous under the intensity of her glare. "She has been named Fated Mate and Luna to Alpha King Draven Ashford of Blackthorn. The declaration was made before the entire court. It is already being celebrated across their territory." Marisol, seated near the fire, let out a short, disbelieving laugh. though there was no humor in it at all. "That is not possible," she said. "There must be some mistake. Illyra is nothing. She has never been anything." "There is no mistake, my lady," the messenger said carefully. "The bond was confirmed publicly. She now holds more power than any woman in this region, including, forgive me for saying so, either of you." Edric Voss said nothing at all. He simply stared into the fire, his expression unreadable, though something like dread had begun to settle heavily in his chest. He had sent away the one daughter he had never valued, expecting nothing in return but a temporary peace with a dangerous neighbor. Instead, he had somehow, through blind luck or cruel irony, elevated her above every other woman in Thornwood's history. Cassia's hands curled into fists at her sides. Every insult she had ever thrown at her younger sister, every humiliation, every cold and dismissive word, replayed itself in her mind. No longer harmless cruelty tossed at someone beneath her notice, but a debt she suddenly feared she might one day be forced to repay. "This changes nothing," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "She is still the same pathetic girl she has always been. A title does not change what someone is underneath it." But even as she said the words, a small, cold seed of fear had already taken root in her chest, one that would grow steadily larger with every passing day, that Illyra's new power continued to rise. Morning came to Blackthorn with pale gold light spilling over the black stone towers, and Illyra woke in the grand chamber feeling disoriented, uncertain for a moment whether the events of the previous day had truly happened, or had simply been an elaborate dream born from exhaustion. Then she saw the fire still glowing faintly in the hearth, the fine furs beneath her hands, and she remembered. She was in Blackthorn. She was, impossibly, its Luna. A soft knock came at her door before she had even risen from the bed. A young woman entered, carrying a tray of warm bread, fruit, and tea, her expression open and friendly in a way that caught Illyra off guard. "Good morning, my lady," the woman said, setting the tray down carefully. "I'm Wren. I've been assigned to attend to you during your time here, for as long as you need me." "Thank you," Illyra said, still adjusting to the strangeness of being cared for rather than commanded. "You do not need to call me lady. Illyra is fine." Wren smiled, though there was a note of gentle correction in her voice. "Forgive me, but I think you'll find the entire pack disagrees with you on that point. You're our Luna now. It matters to people here, more than you might realize yet." As Illyra dressed in the fine clothing that had been laid out for her, soft blue fabric, far finer than anything she had ever owned, she found herself both comforted and unsettled by Wren's easy warmth. She had spent so many years being treated as invisible, or worse, as a burden, that kindness now felt almost suspicious, something she instinctively searched for hidden motives behind. "Is it true," Illyra asked carefully, "that many people here do not welcome me?" Wren hesitated only slightly before answering honestly. "There are some who question why the Alpha's mate came from Thornwood, given the tension between our packs. Lord Kale has voiced concerns loudly, and others follow his lead out of caution, more than genuine suspicion. But there are also many who simply want to see their Alpha happy, and he has not smiled this often in all the years I've served here. That should count for something." The observation stayed with Illyra throughout the morning, as Draven himself arrived to walk her through the stronghold, introducing her to key members of his court with a firm, protective hand steady at the small of her back. She noticed the way conversations quieted as they passed, the way some eyes lingered on her with open curiosity, and others, particularly among Kale's circle, watched her with a colder, more calculating interest. "They will come around," Draven told her quietly, as they walked through the training grounds, watching warriors spar in the crisp morning air. "Blackthorn has been shaped by decades of conflict. Trust is not something my people give freely. But they respect strength, and they respect loyalty, and in time, they will see both in you." "And if they never come around?" Illyra asked. "If they always see me as an outsider sent by an enemy pack?" Draven stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "Then they will answer to me," he said simply. "You are my mate, Illyra. That is not a title I take lightly, and it is not one I will allow anyone to question without consequence. But I do not think it will come to that. Give them time, give yourself time as well. You have survived far worse than a few suspicious stares, I think." There was something in the way he said it, gentle but perceptive, that made Alira wonder just how much he already understood about the life she had left behind. She had not told him the full truth of her years at Thornwood, the years of being blamed for her mother's death, the cold meals eaten alone in the kitchen after her sisters had finished, the endless small cruelties that had taught her to expect so little from the people who were supposed to love her most. And yet something in his eyes told her that he already sensed the shape of it, even without the details. That evening, Draven hosted a small gathering in her honor, an informal dinner meant to introduce her more personally to the senior members of his court. Alira sat beside him at the long table, acutely aware of every eye upon her, every whispered conversation she could not quite hear. Chaol sat near the far end, watching her with an expression of polite interest that did not entirely mask the calculation underneath it. "Tell us, Lady Alira," Chaol said during a lull in conversation, his tone smooth and pleasant on the surface. "What was it that convinced your family to send you, specifically, as the bride for this truce? Surely Abeda's household has more than one eligible daughter." The question landed with quiet precision, and Alira felt several sets of eyes turn toward her, waiting to see how she would respond. She could feel Draven tense slightly beside her, ready to intervene, but she placed a steadying hand briefly on his arm and answered for herself. "My sisters are older," she said evenly, keeping her voice calm, despite the old, familiar sting of the truth. "They believed themselves more valuable to the family in other roles. I was considered the most expendable. I will not pretend otherwise, since I imagine word of it has already reached this court in one form or another." A brief, uncomfortable silence followed her honesty, broken finally by Draven's low, steady voice. "Then, Thornwood's loss is Blackthorn's fortune," he said, looking at Alira with open pride that made her chest ache in a way she was not prepared for. "Because whatever your family failed to see in you, I do not intend to make the same mistake." Chaol's expression flickered, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before he inclined his head and let the subject drop, though Alira noticed he continued to watch her carefully for the remainder of the evening, his suspicion clearly unresolved despite Draven's clear declaration of loyalty. Later that night, as the gathering wound down and guests began to depart, Draven walked Alira back toward her chamber personally, his hand resting warmly against the small of her back. "I am sorry for Chaol's questions," he said. "He means well, in his own difficult way. He has simply seen too many alliances turn to betrayal in his lifetime to trust easily." "I do not blame him for being cautious," Alira said honestly. "If our positions were reversed, I imagine I would question a stranger's sudden appearance too." Draven studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful in his gaze. "You are remarkably forgiving," he said, "for someone who has clearly had very little reason to be." Alira considered the observation carefully before answering. "I have learned that holding on to anger only feeds the people who hurt you," she said quietly. "I would rather build something new than spend my life resenting what was taken from me." Something shifted in Draven's expression then, a kind of quiet, fierce admiration that made her breath catch in her throat. He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch careful, almost reverent. "Whatever happens from here," he said softly, "know that I consider finding you the single greatest fortune of my entire life. Whatever doubts my court carries, I carry none, not one." Alira stood there in the torchlit hallway, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest, like warmth spreading through cold hands, and for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, she allowed herself to believe, just a little, that perhaps she truly had found somewhere she belonged. But even as that fragile hope took root, elsewhere in the stronghold, Chaol sat alone in his private study, staring at a letter he had just finished writing, one addressed not to anyone within Blackthorn, but to a contact of his, in a distant, unaligned territory, a contact who had, over the years, proven useful in uncovering secrets that powerful men preferred to keep buried. He sealed the letter with quiet deliberation, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. Whatever the mate bond claimed, Chaol was not yet convinced that Alira Voss was simply an innocent bride caught in the crossfire of political maneuvering, and he intended to find out the truth, one way or another, before that truth had the chance to find them first. Weeks passed, and Alira slowly began to settle into a rhythm of life at Blackthorn that felt, at times, almost too gentle to be real. She woke each morning without fear of what cruelty the day might bring. She ate meals without wondering if there would be enough left for her, Once her sisters had taken their share, she walked the halls of the stronghold and was greeted, more and more often, with genuine nods of respect rather than suspicious stares. Draven made a point of including her in matters of the pack whenever he could, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely valued her perspective. She sat beside him during minor council meetings, listened as he settled disputes between pack members, watched the careful, deliberate way he balanced strength with fairness. She began to understand why his people, despite their initial wariness of her, held such fierce loyalty to him. He was not simply feared, he was respected, and increasingly, so was she, by association, and slowly, by her own merit. "You have a gift for reading people," Draven told her one afternoon, as they walked together through the black rose garden, the same one she had passed on her very first day at the stronghold, now blooming defiantly against the encroaching winter cold. "I noticed it during the dispute this morning between the two border families. You saw the real issue before any of my advisors did." "I spent many years learning to read a rune quickly," Alira admitted. "It was often the only warning I had before someone decided to make my day more difficult." Draven's jaw tightened slightly at the reminder of her past, though he said nothing, simply reaching out to take her hand in his as they walked. "I want you to know," he said after a moment, "that I have begun looking into the circumstances of your upbringing more closely, not to pry into things you are not ready to share, but because I intend to understand fully what you endured, so that I might make certain nothing like it ever touches you again." Alira felt a flicker of unease at the idea of Draven uncovering the full truth of her years at Thornwood, not because she feared his judgment, but because some old, deeply ingrained part of her still believed that speaking the truth aloud would somehow make it more real, more shameful. "There is not much to uncover," she said carefully. "I was simply never wanted. That is the whole of it." "I do not believe that is the whole of it," Draven said gently, "and I think, in time, you will trust me enough to tell me the rest yourself. Until then, I am content to wait." His patience, she was discovering, was one of the most disarming things about him. She had expected, given his reputation, a man of impulsive temper and ruthless demands. Instead, she found someone who moved carefully, deliberately, who seemed to understand instinctively that trust could not be forced, only earned slowly, one honest moment at a time. That evening, a visitor arrived at Blackthorn unannounced, and Alira's fragile sense of peace cracked slightly at the sound of the name announced by the guards at the gate. "Lady Cassia Voss of Thornwood requests an audience with the Luna." Alira stood frozen in the hallway where the news reached her, her pulse quickening with a familiar, unwelcome dread. Draven, sensing the shift in her immediately, moved to stand beside her, his expression hardening. "You do not have to see her if you do not wish to," he said firmly. "I can turn her away at the gate myself, and gladly." Alira considered the offer for a long moment, tempted more than she wanted to admit, but something steadier within her, something that had grown stronger during her weeks at Blackthorn, urged her to face this rather than hide from it. "No," she said finally. "I will see her. I think I need to, if only to prove to myself how far I have come since I left Thornwood." Cassia was shown into a private receiving room, and when Alira entered, dressed in the fine clothing befitting her new station, she watched her older sister's carefully composed expression falter for just a moment at the sight of her. "Alira," Cassia said, recovering quickly, offering a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You look well. Marriage, or mating, or whatever this arrangement is called, clearly agrees with you." "What are you doing here, Cassia?" Alira asked, keeping her voice level, refusing to let old habits pull her back into the deferential posture she had spent 19 years perfecting. "Can a sister not simply wish to see how the other is faring?" Cassia asked, settling herself into a chair without waiting to be invited to sit. "Thornwood has been in something of a difficult position since your rather sudden rise in status. Father thought it wise that someone from the family maintain a connection here, given the circumstances." "You mean Father is hoping I will use my position to benefit Thornwood," Alira said plainly, watching the flicker of surprise cross Cassia's face at her sister's newfound directness. "After 19 years of being told I was worthless to this family, you now wish to remind me that I am, in fact, useful, provided the usefulness benefits you." Cassia's composure slipped slightly, irritation flashing briefly in her eyes, before she smoothed it away again. "You have grown bold," she said. "I suppose a crown will do that to a person." No, Elira said quietly. Kindness did that. Something you and Marisol never once offered me, not in 19 years. I have learned, since arriving here, what it feels like to be valued, rather than tolerated. I do not intend to forget that lesson simply because you have decided, now that it is convenient, to remember I exist. For a moment, something almost like genuine discomfort crossed Cassia's face, quickly buried beneath practiced composure. I did not come here to fight with you, she said. I came to offer reconciliation, if you are willing to accept it. Elira studied her sister carefully, searching for any hint of sincerity beneath the words, and found, as she had expected, none at all. I will consider your offer, she said finally. Once you offer an apology that does not come wrapped in a request for something in return. Until then, I think it is best if you return to Thornwood. Cassia's jaw tightened, but she rose gracefully from her chair, offering one final, measuring look before she left the room. This is not finished, Elira, she said quietly. You may wear a crown now, but you are still my sister, and family debts have a way of coming due eventually. Long after Cassia had departed the stronghold, Elira sat alone in the private receiving room, her hands trembling slightly with the effort of having stood her ground against a lifetime of ingrained submission. Draven found her there, and without a word, simply sat beside her and took her hand in his, offering silent support, rather than empty reassurances. I am proud of you, he said finally. That could not have been easy. It wasn't, Elira admitted, but it felt necessary. I think I needed to prove to myself, more than to her, that I am no longer the girl she traded away. You never were that girl, Draven said firmly. Not truly. She simply never bothered to look closely enough to see who you actually were. Elira leaned her head against his shoulder, grateful beyond words for the steady warmth of his presence, and did not yet know that Cassia's visit had not been the simple act of reconciliation she claimed. Cassia had come with another purpose entirely, one she had accomplished quietly during her brief time within the stronghold's walls, passing a folded note to a contact Cale had unknowingly put her in touch with weeks earlier, a note that would set in motion consequences none of them yet understood. In the days following Cassia's visit, Elira noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the stronghold, one she could not quite name at first. Servants who had grown warm and familiar with her over the past weeks seemed slightly more reserved. Conversations that had once flowed easily in her presence now carried faint undercurrents of hesitation. She mentioned it to Wren one morning, as the young woman helped her dress. It is nothing you have done, my lady, Wren said carefully, though her eyes betrayed a reluctance to say more. Then what is it? Elira pressed gently. Please, Wren, I would rather know the truth than be left guessing. Wren hesitated a long moment before answering. There have been whispers, she admitted finally. Some among the court have begun to question whether your sister's visit was truly as innocent as it appeared. Lord Cale has been quite vocal about his suspicions since her departure. He believes Thornwood may have used the visit to gather information, or worse, to plant something within these walls. Elira's stomach twisted with unease. She thought of Cassia's parting words, family debts have a way of coming due, and felt a cold certainty settle over her that her sister's visit had not been as simple as it appeared. She had known Cassia was capable of cruelty, but the idea that she might be capable of outright betrayal, of using Elira's newfound position as a weapon against the very pack that had welcomed her, filled Elira with a dread she had not expected to feel on Blackthorn's behalf. She sought out Draven immediately, finding him in his private study reviewing reports with General Falk, one of his most senior and trusted commanders. Both men looked up as she entered, and something in her expression must have alerted them immediately to her distress. What is wrong? Draven asked, rising at once. I need to know if there is any truth to the rumors about Cassia's visit, Elira said without preamble. I need to know if my presence here has put Blackthorn at risk. Draven exchanged a brief glance with General Falk before answering carefully. We have not confirmed anything definitive, he said, but Cale did raise concerns after reviewing the movements of your sister's attendants during her time within the stronghold. One of them was seen speaking briefly with a member of staff who has since been unaccounted for. The news landed heavily in Elira's chest. Then it is possible, she said quietly, that I have brought exactly the kind of danger to your doorstep that you took me in to prevent. You have brought nothing, Draven said firmly, closing the distance between them and taking her hands in his. Whatever scheme your sister may or may not be involved in, it is not your doing, Alira. You did not choose to be traded here. You did not choose your family's actions. I will not allow you to carry guilt for choices that were never yours to make." Despite his reassurance, Alira could not entirely shake the weight of dread settling over her. She thought of her father's tired eyes, of Cassia's calculating smile, of Marisol's casual cruelty, and wondered, not for the first time, just how far her family might be willing to go to protect their own interests, even at the cost of an entire pack's safety, even at the cost of the sister they had so easily discarded. "I want to help," Alira said finally, straightening her shoulders with newfound resolve. "Whatever investigation you are conducting, I want to be part of it. I know my family better than anyone in this stronghold. I may be able to see connections others would miss." Draven studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the wisdom of involving her directly in a matter that touched so closely on her own family's potential betrayal. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said, "but you will not act alone. Whatever we uncover together." Over the following days, Alira worked closely alongside General Falk and, more reluctantly, Kale himself, reviewing reports of unusual activity along the border, tracing the movements of Cassia's attendants during their brief stay, and cross-referencing the timing of certain suspicious incidents with messages that had passed in and out of the stronghold. Kale's initial coldness toward her began to thaw slightly as he observed her sharp attention to detail, her willingness to consider uncomfortable truths about her own family without flinching away from them. "You are more useful than I expected," Kale admitted grudgingly one evening, as they pored over a series of intercepted messages together. "I confess, I believed your arrival here was, at best, a naive accident, and at worst, a deliberate scheme. I am beginning to reconsider that assessment." "I understand your caution," Alira said, not looking up from the documents in front of her. "I would question a stranger's intentions too, especially given Blackthorn's history with Thornwood. I only ask that you judge me by my actions, rather than by my family's." "That," Kale said, "seems an entirely reasonable request. One I am inclined, more each day, to grant." Despite the growing trust between them, the investigation revealed troubling patterns. Messages had indeed passed between someone within Thornwood and an unidentified contact outside the immediate region, someone whose identity remained frustratingly elusive. The timing of these messages coincided suspiciously with several minor disturbances along Blackthorn's borders, disturbances that had, until now, seemed unconnected, but now appeared to form the early pieces of a much larger and more troubling pattern. "Someone is testing our defenses," General Falk said grimly during a private council meeting. Alira, seated at Draven's side, finally afforded a place at the table where such decisions were made. "Probing for weaknesses, and whoever it is, has found a way to funnel information out of Thornwood, whether Beta Voss is aware of it or not." "Could my father be involved?" Alira asked, dreading the answer even as she asked the question. "We do not yet know," Draven said honestly. "It is possible he is entirely unaware, a pawn being used by someone closer to him than he realizes. It is also possible he is complicit, whether through fear or ambition. We will not know until we uncover the source directly." Alira felt the weight of the uncertainty settle heavily over the room. Whatever the truth turned out to be, she understood now that her arrival at Blackthorn had not simply been the end of one difficult chapter in her life. It had been the beginning of something far larger, a conflict that threatened not only her own fragile happiness, but the safety of an entire pack that had shown her more kindness in a few short weeks than her own family had offered in 19 years. "Whatever we find," she said quietly, looking around the table at the serious faces gathered there, "I want you to know that my loyalty belongs to Blackthorn now. Whatever role my family plays in this, I will not protect them at the cost of the people who have shown me true kindness for the first time in my life." Draven reached beneath the table and took her hand in his, a small, private gesture of gratitude and support amid the tense atmosphere of the council chamber. "Then we face this together," he said, "as we will face everything from now on." Outside the stronghold walls, unseen by any of them, a rider departed under cover of darkness, carrying a message toward a distant, unaligned territory, a message that would soon set in motion events far more dangerous than any of them yet realized. Back at Thornwood, the atmosphere had grown tense, in ways the pack had not experienced in years. Beta Edric Voss found himself summoned repeatedly to closed council meetings, questioned about trade agreements he barely remembered approving, about messengers he did not recall sending. Something within his own household had shifted beneath his notice, and he was only beginning to sense the shape of it. "Father, you look unwell," Marisol observed one evening, watching him push his food around his plate without eating. "Is something troubling you?" "Blackthorn has sent word," Edric said heavily. "They believe someone within Thornwood has been sharing information with an outside party, someone hostile to both our territories. They are conducting a formal investigation, and I fear it will not end well for whoever they find responsible." Marisol's expression flickered, quick and involuntary, before she composed herself again. "That is troubling news," she said carefully. "Do they suspect anyone in particular?" "Not yet," Edric admitted, "but it is only a matter of time before the trail leads somewhere. I only pray it does not lead back to this house." Across the room, Cassia said nothing at all, her attention fixed with unusual intensity on the fire crackling in the hearth. She had not expected the message she passed during her visit to Blackthorn to draw such swift and thorough scrutiny. She had believed, foolishly perhaps, that her contact's inquiries were simply a means of gathering leverage, information that might someday prove useful in negotiating better terms for Thornwood, nothing more sinister than the kind of quiet political maneuvering every pack engaged in from time to time. She had not considered, or had not allowed herself to consider, that the contact she had been asked to assist might have far darker intentions than simple information gathering. Later that night, alone in her chamber, Cassia unfolded a letter she had received just that morning, one she had not yet shown to anyone in her family. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message brief and precise. "The information you provided has proven useful. We require one final piece before our arrangement is complete. Details to follow. Continue as instructed, and your family's debts will be forgiven in full." Cassia stared at the letter for a long time, her earlier confidence curdling slowly into something closer to fear. She had agreed to pass along minor information about Blackthorn's defenses, believing it a small price to pay for the substantial debt relief promised to her family in return. Debt that had quietly threatened to bankrupt Thornwood for the better part of 2 years, a fact carefully hidden from most of the pack to avoid panic. She had told herself it was harmless, that no real harm could come from a few observations passed along to a distant contact with vague and unspecified interests. Now, faced with the reality that Blackthorn had noticed that an investigation was already underway, she understood with mounting horror just how far beyond her control this arrangement had already grown. She thought of Alira, of the calm, steady strength her younger sister had displayed during their conversation at Blackthorn. So unlike the meek, easily dismissed girl Cassia had spent years underestimating. She thought of the accusation Alira had leveled at her. Family debts have a way of coming due, and realized with bitter irony that she had spoken those words without fully understanding how quickly her own debts were about to come due in return. The following morning, a new arrival came to Thornwood, a man Cassia did not recognize, requesting a private audience with her, under the pretense of discussing trade matters. She met him in a quiet corner of the packhouse gardens, her nerves fraying with every passing moment. "You are behind schedule," the man said without preamble, his tone flat and businesslike. "We require the final piece of information now, not later. Blackthorn's investigation has made our window considerably smaller than anticipated." "I do not know what more you expect me to provide," Cassia said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I gave you what information I could gather during my visit. I have no further access to their stronghold." "Then you will find a way to gain access again," the man said coldly. "Or your family's debts, all of them, will be called due immediately, and Thornwood will fall into ruin within the season. Your father's mismanagement has left this pack more vulnerable than you seem to realize, Lady Cassia. We are, quite simply, the only thing standing between Thornwood and complete collapse." Cassia's stomach dropped as the full weight of the arrangement she had entered into settled over her at last. She had believed she was simply protecting her family's interests, perhaps even securing a small advantage over her sister's unexpected rise in status. She had not understood, until this very moment, that she had entangled Thornwood in something far larger and more dangerous, something that now threatened not only Blackthorn's security, but her own family's survival. "What exactly do you intend to do with this information?" she asked, dread creeping into her voice. "That," the man said, is no longer your concern. Your concern is providing what we require, when we require it. I trust you understand the consequences of failure." He left without another word, and Cassia stood alone in the garden for a long time afterward, her earlier resentment toward Alira curdling slowly into something closer to genuine fear, both for her family and, though she was reluctant to admit it even to herself, for the sister she had so carelessly wronged. That evening, she found her father alone in his study, and, for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, spoke to him with complete honesty. "Father," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something, and I fear you will not forgive me for it." Edric listened in growing horror as his eldest daughter confessed the full extent of her involvement, the letters passed, the information shared, the debt relief promised in exchange for cooperation that had, without her fully realizing it, spiraled into something resembling treason against the very pack Thornwood had only recently made peace with. "You have put us all in grave danger," he said finally, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Not only our family, but every soul within Thornwood's territory. If Blackthorn's investigation traces this back to us, and it surely will, we may face consequences far worse than debt." "I know," Cassia said, tears finally slipping free. Tears of genuine fear, rather than manipulation, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I did not understand how far this would go. I thought I was simply protecting the family. I did not think of the cost to anyone else." "You did not think of your sister," Edric said quietly, "who you sent unknowingly into the middle of whatever scheme you have entangled us in." Cassia said nothing, unable to argue against the truth of it. Whatever came next, she understood now that she had not only endangered an entire pack, but had unknowingly placed her own sister directly in the path of a danger far greater than either of them yet fully understood. At Blackthorn, the investigation continued to gather momentum, each new discovery pulling the threads of the conspiracy tighter into a shape that grew more alarming by the day. General Falk arrived at a council meeting one afternoon with news that silenced the entire room. "We have identified the outside contact," he announced grimly. "A former mercenary commander named Osric Vane, once employed by a rival territory to the north, before being dismissed for insubordination. He has spent the past several years building connections among smaller, struggling packs, offering debt relief and protection in exchange for information and, we now believe, eventual loyalty when the time comes for him to make his move." "Make his move toward what end?" Draven asked, his expression darkening. "We believe he intends to weaken the strongest packs in the region, Blackthorn foremost among them, by gathering enough leverage over smaller territories to eventually stage a coordinated uprising, using indebted packs as unwilling allies," Falk explained. "Thornwood, it seems, was simply one of several territories he has been quietly manipulating over the past 2 years." Alira felt a cold chill settle over her as the pieces clicked into place. "Then my arrival here," she said slowly. "The timing of the truce, the trade of a bride as a peace offering, none of that was simply coincidence." Kale, seated across the table, met her eyes with something that looked almost like sympathy. "We believe Osric Vane may have influenced the terms of the truce negotiations through intermediaries within Thornwood's council, perhaps without your father's full knowledge," he said. "The timing allowed someone with access to Thornwood's council to be placed within Blackthorn's walls, under the guise of a diplomatic gesture. Whether that was you specifically, or simply the general opportunity your arrival presented, remains unclear." "You believe I was meant to be a spy," Alira said quietly, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "Sent here unknowingly, perhaps to gather information, or worse." "We do not believe you were a willing participant in any scheme," Draven said firmly, reaching for her hand beneath the table. "But it is possible, even likely, that your presence here was engineered to serve a purpose beyond simple diplomacy, a purpose you were never made aware of." The realization settled heavily over Alira, an uncomfortable mixture of relief and horror. Relief, because it confirmed what she had always suspected, that her family's decision to send her had never been about her at all, but about their own interests, however unknowingly entangled with something far larger and more dangerous. Horror, because it meant she had been used, not once, but twice, first by her sister's casual cruelty, and now, potentially, by a scheme that threatened the safety of the pack, that had shown her more genuine care in a few short weeks, than her own family had offered in 19 years. "I want to help end this," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath it. "Whatever role my family played, knowingly or not, I refuse to let it continue. If Osric Vane believes Thornwood, and by extension myself, remain useful to his plans, then perhaps that belief can be turned against him." "What do you propose?" Draven asked carefully. "Let him believe his plan is still working," Elira said, an idea forming rapidly as she spoke. "If Cassia has been in contact with him, and I suspect she has, given her visit here, then we may be able to use that connection to draw him out, to learn the full extent of his plans, before he has the chance to act on them." The room fell into thoughtful silence as the council considered her proposal. It was General Falk who finally spoke. "It is a bold plan," he said, "and a dangerous one. If Osric Vane suspects for even a moment that we have discovered his scheme, he may act more swiftly and more violently than if we simply move to shut down his operation immediately." "Then we must be careful," Draven said, his gray eyes settling on Elira with a mixture of pride and concern. "But I trust Elira's instincts on this matter. She understands her family, and by extension, the vulnerabilities Osric Vane has exploited, better than any of us." Over the following days, a careful plan was set into motion. A messenger was dispatched to Thornwood under the pretense of arranging a formal visit between the two packs. A visit meant to further solidify the truce now that Elira's mating had been publicly celebrated. Hidden within the formal correspondence was a private message meant for Cassia alone, one carefully worded to suggest that Elira wished to reconcile with her family, and that she hoped Cassia might visit again soon to discuss matters of mutual benefit to both packs. The bait, they hoped, would be tempting enough for Osric Vane, working through Cassia, to attempt one final push toward whatever endgame he had been building toward for the past 2 years. Elira spent the following days preparing herself carefully for whatever confrontation might come, training with Wren's guidance in basic self-defense, studying maps of the border territories with General Falk, learning everything she could about the man who had, without her knowledge, shaped so much of the turmoil surrounding her recent life. "You do not have to do this," Draven told her one evening, watching her practice a defensive stance in the training yard, her movements growing steadily more confident with each passing day. "I could handle this confrontation without placing you at risk." "I know," Elira said, wiping sweat from her brow, meeting his concerned gaze steadily. "But I need to do this, Draven. My entire life, decisions were made for me, around me, without my input or consent. I was traded away like an object, with no say in my own fate. This time, I choose to face this threat directly, on my own terms. I will not hide from it simply because it frightens me." Draven studied her for a long moment, something fierce and protective, and deeply proud warring behind his gray eyes. "Then I will stand beside you," he said finally. "Not in front of you, not behind you, but beside you, as your equal in this fight, exactly as you deserve." Elira felt something steady and warm settle in her chest at his words, a certainty that had been slowly building since her arrival at Blackthorn. Whatever waited for her in the coming confrontation with Osric Vane, whatever revelations still lay ahead about her family's involvement, she no longer faced it as the discarded, unwanted daughter of Thornwood. She faced it as Luna of Blackthorn, mate to the Alpha King, and a woman who had finally, after 19 years, learned what it meant to stand her ground. Cassia received the message from Blackthorn with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief, because it offered a possible path back into Blackthorn's stronghold, exactly what Osric Vane had been demanding of her. Dread, because some instinct she could not quite silence warned her that something about the invitation felt too convenient, too perfectly timed to be entirely genuine. She brought the message to her father immediately, no longer willing to make decisions of this magnitude on her own. Edric read the letter carefully, his expression unreadable. "This could be an opportunity," he said slowly, "a chance to end this arrangement with Vane, if we handle it correctly. If Blackthorn is truly willing to extend an olive branch, perhaps we can use this visit to warn them directly of Vane's involvement, rather than continuing to serve his purposes against our will." "And if it is a trap?" Cassia asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest since the message arrived. "If Blackthorn already suspects my involvement, and this invitation is simply a means of drawing me back into their walls to confront me directly, Then we face that confrontation honestly, Edric said, his voice heavy with the weight of a decision he should have made weeks earlier. I have been a coward long enough, Cassia. I allowed fear of Blackthorn's strength to guide too many of my decisions, including the decision to send your sister away without ever considering the cost to her. I will not compound that mistake by continuing to hide the truth from a pack that has, by all accounts, treated her with more kindness than we ever did. Cassia stared at her father, surprised by the resolve in his voice, a resolve she had rarely witnessed in him during her lifetime. You intend to confess everything, she said slowly, even knowing the consequences that might bring down on this family. I intend to do what should have been done from the very beginning, Edric said. I intend to protect this pack honestly, rather than continuing to protect it through deception and fear. Osric Vane has used our weakness against us for 2 years. It is time we stopped being weak. The journey back to Blackthorn felt entirely different to Cassia than her previous visit had. Where before she had traveled with careful calculation, gathering information to satisfy Vane's demands, now she traveled with her father at her side, carrying the full weight of a confession that would likely upend whatever fragile trust remained between their two packs. They were received at the stronghold gates with far more caution than Cassia's previous visit had warranted, guards flanking them closely, as they were escorted through the courtyard toward the great hall. Elira waited there, standing beside Draven, her expression carefully composed, though Cassia could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. Elira, Edric said, his voice thick with an emotion Cassia had rarely heard from him. I have come to speak an honest truth, one I should have spoken long before now. Elira studied her father carefully, searching his face for the same tired indifference she had grown so accustomed to over the years, and found instead something that looked, for the first time in her memory, like genuine remorse. Speak then, she said quietly. I am listening. Edric explained everything, the mounting debts that had quietly threatened Thornwood's survival for 2 years, Osric Vane's offer of relief in exchange for information, Cassia's unwitting entanglement in a scheme far larger than either of them had understood at the time. Cassia added her own account, describing the letters, the threats, the growing dread that had finally convinced her to confess everything, rather than continue serving a man whose true intentions had become increasingly clear. When they finished, the great hall fell into heavy silence. Draven's expression had grown dark and dangerous throughout the confession, though he remained silent, allowing Elira to respond first. You endangered an entire pack, Elira said finally, addressing Cassia directly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion churning beneath the surface. You endangered the people who took me in when my own family discarded me without a second thought, and you did it to protect debts that could have been resolved honestly, had Father simply sought help rather than hiding Thornwood's weakness out of pride. I know, Cassia said, tears slipping free once more, genuine this time, stripped of any manipulation. I have no excuse that makes what I did acceptable. I only hope that by coming forward now, before Vane's plan could fully unfold, we might still prevent the worst of what he intended. Draven finally spoke, his voice carrying the full authority of the Alpha King, rather than simply the man Elira had come to know privately. Your confession changes the nature of this conflict considerably, he said. Rather than facing Thornwood as an enemy harboring a traitor, we now face a common threat, one that has manipulated multiple packs across this region for his own gain. I am inclined to view your honesty favorably, provided it comes with full cooperation in bringing Osric Vane to justice. You have our complete cooperation, Edric said immediately. Whatever information we possess, whatever resources Thornwood can offer, they are yours. Elira watched her father carefully as he spoke, searching for some sign of the calculated self-interest that had defined so many of his previous decisions, and found instead something that looked genuinely different, a man finally choosing courage over convenience, however belatedly. Then let us discuss how we intend to end this threat once and for all, Draven said, gesturing toward the council chamber, where General Falk and Kale already waited to begin the difficult work of turning Cassia's confession into a coordinated plan against Osric Vane. As the group moved toward the chamber, Cassia hesitated, catching Elira's arm gently before her sister could follow the others. Elira, she said quietly, whatever happens next, whatever judgment this pact decides to bring against our family for my actions, I want you to know that I am sorry. Not simply for the danger I placed you in through my involvement with Vane, but for every cruel word I ever spoke to you throughout our childhood. You deserved so much better than what our family gave you." Illyra studied her sister's face carefully, searching for the same manipulation she had grown accustomed to over the years, and found instead something that looked, for the first time, like genuine remorse. She did not yet know if she could fully forgive the years of cruelty her sister had inflicted upon her, but she recognized, with cautious hope, that perhaps something had genuinely begun to shift within her family, however belatedly, however incomplete. "Thank you for telling the truth," Illyra said finally. "It does not erase the past, Cassia, but it is a beginning, and I suppose that is more than I expected to receive from this family." Together, they walked toward the council chamber, where the difficult work of dismantling Osric Vane's scheme was only just beginning. With Cassia's confession providing the final pieces needed to understand Osric Vane's operation, the council moved swiftly to set a trap of their own. General Falk proposed using the very meeting Vane had demanded as bait, arranging for Cassia to appear to comply with his final request, while Blackthorn's warriors positioned themselves to intercept him at the agreed location, a quiet crossing point along the northern border, where previous exchanges of information had reportedly taken place. "He will expect caution," Cale warned during the planning session. "A man like Vane does not survive years of manipulating powerful packs without developing careful instincts. If he senses even a hint of deception, he will disappear before we ever get close enough to stop him." "Then we give him exactly what he expects to see," Illyra said, an idea forming as she studied the map spread across the council table. Cassia arrives alone, as instructed, appearing to have gathered the final information he demanded. "Meanwhile, your warriors remain hidden at a distance, close enough to intervene the moment he reveals himself, but far enough to avoid detection until the critical moment." "And what information do we offer him?" Draven asked. "That will not actually endanger this pack, but will still convince him the exchange is genuine." Illyra considered the question carefully. "Give him something true, but useless," she said. "Details about troop movements that have already changed. Defensive positions we intend to relocate before he could ever act on the information. Let him believe he has succeeded, right up until the moment we close the trap around him." The plan was refined over the following days, every detail examined carefully to minimize risk, while maximizing the chance of capturing Vane before he could disappear back into whatever shadows had allowed him to operate undetected for so long. Cassia, determined to make amends for her earlier involvement, insisted on playing her role in the exchange herself, despite the obvious danger. "You do not have to do this," Illyra told her sister privately, the night before the planned meeting, surprised to find herself genuinely concerned for Cassia's safety, despite everything that had passed between them. "There are other ways to draw him out that do not place you directly in harm's way." "I want to do this," Cassia said firmly. "I helped create this danger, Illyra, however unknowingly. I want to help end it, directly, rather than simply confessing and leaving others to clean up the consequences of my choices." On the morning of the planned meeting, tension hung thick over the entire stronghold as warriors moved quietly into position along the northern border, careful to remain hidden from view. Illyra insisted on accompanying the operation, positioned at a safe distance alongside Draven, close enough to witness the confrontation, though Draven had made her promise, reluctantly, to remain hidden unless her intervention became absolutely necessary. Cassia arrived at the designated crossing point precisely on schedule, alone, carrying a small sealed envelope containing the carefully prepared false information. She did not have to wait long before a figure emerged from the tree line on the opposite side of the border, a tall man dressed in plain traveling clothes that gave no hint of the danger he represented. "You are prompt," Osric Vane said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet clearing. "I trust you have brought what was requested." "I have," Cassia said, her voice steadier than she felt, extending the envelope toward him. "Though I want assurances that this concludes our arrangement completely. My family has fulfilled every demand you have made of us." Vane accepted the envelope, opening it briefly to scan its contents with a satisfied expression. "This will do nicely," he said. "You may consider Thornwood's debts settled, as promised, provided this information proves as useful as I expect it to be." It was in that moment, as Vane's attention remained fixed on the false documents in his hands, that General Falk gave the signal. Warriors emerged swiftly from their hidden positions, surrounding the clearing before Vayne had a chance to react. His expression shifted instantly from satisfaction to cold calculation as he realized the trap that had closed around him. "Clever," he said, his voice remarkably calm, despite the sudden reversal of his circumstances. "Though I confess, I did not expect Thornwood's timid beta to develop this much courage so suddenly." "You have manipulated my family for the last time," Cassia said, stepping back as warriors closed in around Vayne, her earlier fear giving way to something closer to righteous anger. "Whatever debts you believe were settled, they end here, along with whatever plans you had for the rest of this region." Vayne's eyes flicked briefly toward the surrounding warriors, calculating his odds, before settling into a resigned stillness that suggested he understood, at least for now, that resistance would prove futile against Blackthorn's superior numbers. "You have caught me," he acknowledged, "but you should know, this operation extends far beyond a single meeting in a quiet clearing. There are others involved, other packs entangled in arrangements similar to Thornwood's. Capturing me alone will not unravel everything I have built." "Then you will tell us everything you know," Draven's voice cut through the clearing as he emerged from his hidden position, Illyra close behind him, her presence drawing a flicker of surprise across Vayne's otherwise composed features. "The Alpha King himself," Vayne said, something like grim amusement in his tone. "And the fated mate whose arrival set all of this in motion, however unintentionally. I confess, I did not anticipate the bond between you two complicating my plans quite so significantly. I had expected Thornwood's spare daughter to remain simply that, a spare, easily overlooked, easily used. Instead, she became rather inconveniently important." "Your plans end today," Draven said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as Alpha King. "Whatever network you have built across this region, whatever other packs you have entangled in debt and coercion, you will help us dismantle it entirely, or you will face consequences far more severe than simple capture." Vayne studied the Alpha King for a long moment, weighing his remaining options, before finally, grudgingly, inclining his head in acknowledgement of his defeat. "Very well," he said. "It seems my careful work has finally met its match. I will cooperate, provided certain considerations are extended in return." As warriors led Vayne away toward secure confinement within the stronghold, Illyra felt the weight of the past several weeks finally begin to lift from her shoulders. The threat that had shadowed her arrival at Blackthorn, the conspiracy that had entangled her family and endangered the pack that had shown her genuine kindness for the first time in her life, had finally been brought into the light and neutralized. She turned to find Cassia standing nearby, visibly shaken but relieved, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the sisters embraced, without any trace of the old resentment that had defined their relationship for so many years. "Thank you," Illyra said quietly, "for helping to make this right." "Thank you," Cassia replied, "for giving me the chance to try, after everything I did to make that so difficult to deserve." Behind them, Draven watched the reconciliation with quiet satisfaction, understanding that whatever remained to be untangled from Vayne's wider network of manipulation across the region, the most immediate and personal threat to his mate and his pack had finally, decisively, been resolved. In the weeks that followed Osric Vayne's capture, Blackthorn worked closely with allied packs across the region to unravel the full extent of his network. True to his word, Vayne provided information that allowed several other territories, similarly entangled in debt and coercion, to free themselves from his manipulation, without the danger of open conflict. Thornwood, having cooperated fully throughout the process, found its standing among neighboring packs quietly restored, no longer viewed as a weak territory vulnerable to outside manipulation, but as a pack that had shown courage in confronting its own mistakes honestly. Edric Voss returned to Thornwood a changed man, more transparent with his counsel about the pack's genuine struggles, more willing to seek help rather than hide weakness behind pride. He wrote to Illyra regularly in the months that followed, tentative letters at first, careful not to presume too much forgiveness too quickly, gradually growing warmer as Illyra, cautiously, allowed a new kind of relationship to grow between them, one built on honesty rather than obligation. Cassia visited Blackthorn several more times in the following months, each visit a little easier than the last, the old resentment between the sisters slowly giving way to something resembling genuine affection, however carefully rebuilt. Marisol remained more distant, unwilling or unable to fully confront the years of casual cruelty she had inflicted on her younger sister, though even she, in time, began sending occasional letters, small gestures toward a reconciliation, that Alira accepted without demanding more than either sister was ready to give. Within Blackthorn itself, Alira's standing among the court had transformed entirely from those uncertain early days. Cale, who had once viewed her with open suspicion, had become one of her staunchest allies, his sharp instincts for political maneuvering proving invaluable as they worked together to strengthen the pack's defenses against any future threats similar to Vane's. The servants who had once whispered uncertainly about the plain, unremarkable bride from Thornwood now spoke of their Luna with genuine pride, recounting to visitors from other territories how she had helped uncover and dismantle a conspiracy that had threatened the entire region. On a clear autumn morning, nearly a year after Alira had first arrived at Blackthorn's gates, expecting nothing more than a life of quiet obscurity in a stranger's kingdom, the stronghold prepared for a formal coronation ceremony, one meant to celebrate her official recognition as Luna of Blackthorn, before representatives from every allied pack across the region. Alira stood before the mirror in her chamber, dressed in a gown of deep midnight blue, her mother's pendant resting at her throat, exactly as it had on the day she left Thornwood behind. Wren fussed gently over the final details of her appearance, her expression bright with genuine happiness. "You look every bit the queen this pack has come to know you as," Wren said, adjusting a final fold of fabric. "Do you remember, that first day, how frightened you looked standing in the great hall, waiting for someone to decide your fate?" "I remember," Alira said softly, studying her own reflection, hardly recognizing the confident, composed woman looking back at her, compared to the frightened, uncertain girl who had arrived here so many months ago. "I did not believe, that day, that I would ever feel as though I belonged anywhere. Certainly not somewhere as grand as this." "And now?" Wren asked gently. Alira considered the question carefully, thinking of everything that had happened since that first terrifying day, the mate bond that had transformed her entire understanding of her own worth, the conspiracy she had helped uncover and dismantle, the slow, careful rebuilding of a relationship with the family that had once discarded her so easily, the genuine friendships she had built within these once unfamiliar walls. "Now," she said finally, "I believe I have finally found the place I was always meant to be, even if it took the cruelest path imaginable to lead me here." A knock came at her door, and Draven entered, dressed in formal black and silver, looking every bit the powerful Alpha King his people had come to revere, though the expression on his face as his eyes found hers held nothing but warmth and open adoration. "They are ready for you," he said, crossing the room to take her hands in his, studying her with quiet wonder, as though he still could not quite believe, even after all these months, the good fortune that had brought her into his life. "Are you ready?" "I am," Alira said, and found, to her own quiet surprise, that she meant it completely. They walked together toward the great hall, the same hall where she had first felt the overwhelming pull of the mate bond settle into place, where a frightened, unwanted girl had first begun the long journey toward becoming the confident woman walking beside her Alpha now. The hall had been transformed for the occasion, banners representing allied packs from across the region hanging from the high wooden beams. Hundreds of guests gathered to witness the formal ceremony. As Alira ascended the raised platform beside Draven, the entire hall falling silent in anticipation, she caught sight of familiar faces scattered among the crowd. General Falk, standing proud near the front. Cale, his earlier suspicion long since replaced by genuine respect and friendship. Wren, beaming with unabashed joy, and near the back of the hall, somewhat hesitant but present nonetheless, her father and Cassia, having traveled from Thornwood specifically to witness this moment, a formal acknowledgement of the family bond they were slowly, carefully rebuilding. Draven turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying easily through the vast hall. "Nearly a year ago," he said, "this woman arrived at our gates, sent by a family who failed to see her true worth, expected by many within these walls to be nothing more than a temporary political arrangement. Instead, she proved herself to be my fated mate, my equal in strength and wisdom, and the woman who helped protect this pack, and countless others across this region, from a danger we did not even know we faced." He turned to face Alira directly, his gray eyes warm with open pride and affection. I formally recognize Alira Voss as Luna of Blackthorn, my equal in every sense, and the truest partner I could have ever hoped to find. The hall erupted into applause, warm and genuine, entirely different from the uncertain, whispering silence that had greeted her arrival so many months before. Alira looked out over the crowd, at the faces of people who had once viewed her with suspicion, and now regarded her with genuine respect and affection, and felt something settle deeply and permanently into place within her chest. A sense of belonging she had spent her entire life believing she would never find. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Draven pulled her gently aside to a quiet balcony overlooking the mountains, the same mountains that had once seemed so foreboding on her first journey toward Blackthorn, now simply beautiful in the fading autumn light. "Do you regret any of it?" Draven asked quietly, studying her face in the soft evening light. "The pain your family caused you, the danger we faced together, the difficult path that led you here?" Alira considered the question honestly, thinking of everything she had endured and everything she had gained in return. "I would not choose to relive the cruelty," she said finally, "but I cannot regret the path that led me to you, to this pack, to the family I have found here, even the fragile, rebuilding relationship with the family I was born into. Every difficult step led me exactly where I was meant to be." Draven pulled her close, resting his forehead gently against hers, the weight of everything they had faced together finally settling into a quiet, hard-won peace. "Then I am grateful," he said softly, "for every difficult step that brought you to me, however cruel the path that led you here." Below them, the celebration continued long into the night, warmth and laughter filling the halls of a stronghold that had, for Alira, transformed from a stranger's kingdom into the truest home she had ever known. The girl who had once been traded away by her own sisters, dismissed as unwanted and unremarkable, had become something far greater than any of them had ever imagined possible. She had become Luna of Blackthorn, beloved by her pack, respected by allies across the region, and cherished, above all else, by the mate who had seen her true worth from the very first moment their eyes had met. And as the stars rose over the black mountains surrounding her new home, Alira understood, with quiet and complete certainty, that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she would face them not as the discarded daughter of Thornwood, but as exactly who she had always been meant to become.